Welcome back to part two of our series where we are building a export workbook. I don't know what the hell we would call it, but we're calling it something. It's basically a workbook where we can build entire presentations from scratch and making it where it's interactive using some type of Excel object, in this case, a table where you can export all of this information to a presentation and then also do things like position them, define the paste type, and then also modifying the slide titles. So a lot of good information in this video, especially for those of you who want to go on to the more advanced topics inside of Excel VBA. So in our previous video, we focused on setting these little drop downs for this particular column. Now that we've done that, we're going to now write the code that actually takes this information and makes sense of it. So it's going to take all this information and use it in our process where we start exporting our particular objects. So first things first, let's jump into our Visual Basic editor. And then from here, you need to create a new module. I already have one, but you should create a new module. We'll call this one export to PowerPoint. I'm calling mine video because I already have one. And then from here, just because we're going to be writing a lot, we're going to do option explicit at the top. And then from here, let's create a new subroutine. We'll call it export table, and then do that. Okay. And like everything else, we're going to be declaring some variables. But for this particular video, we do need to make a reference to an object library. Because we're going to be exporting our objects to PowerPoint, we probably want to have IntelliSense help us write the code. So IntelliSense will basically help us do things like code completion. But in order to leverage that for the PowerPoint object library, we have to enable the reference library that basically tells IntelliSense, hey, these are all the objects and these are what the objects can do and all that kind of stuff. So if you go up to the little tools component on your little, command bar, you would do references. And then you'll notice I already have it enabled, but you want to have the Microsoft PowerPoint 16.0 object library enabled. So that means there's a little check next to it. Now, depending on the version of Office you have, you could have a number that's less. So I think 13, Excel 2013 is 15. 2010 is, I think, 12, if I remember correctly. I can't remember off the top of my head. If you're still on Excel 2010, there's a bigger issue at hand. And then there's 2007 and so on and so on. Now, the nice thing is all of these are organized in alphabetical order. So if you just scroll down to M for Microsoft, and then you go down to P right around here, you should see it. You just want to make sure there's a check in the box. If there is a check in the box, it means it's enabled and you can start using it. One final thing. If you are planning to share this workbook, there is something you have to keep in mind. If the person is not on the same version of Excel as you, more like, hey, I'm on Office 365 and then I give it to somebody who's on Excel 2010, there's a good chance the code will not work for them. In fact, I can guarantee you the code won't work for them. The reason why is they don't have an Excel 2016 object library. They don't have a PowerPoint 2016 object library, for example. So you have to keep that in mind. If you start sharing your code with somebody else and they're not at the same version as you, then they're looking for an object library that doesn't exist on their system. So Excel doesn't know how to handle that, or VBA in general just doesn't know how to handle that. So in that situation, what I would recommend you do is you use early binding to write the code. And then when you actually share the code, you go to late binding. So you don't keep the type library enabled, you dereference it, and then you change all the variables to object variables. I do have a topic about this in another video. I'll make sure to put that in the comments or the description. Okay, so first things first, let's start declaring our variables. The fun part, the part we all love doing so much. Just a lot of worksheet, workbook objects, nothing super crazy. A lot of these we already did in the previous video. Just to make sure that I'm being consistent. This is going to be a list object. And then we're going to also have a Excel table column. This will be a list column. I'm not sure if I use that one, but I'll keep it. There is a table row. This will be a range object, not a list row object. I will explain that when we get there. Dim Excel chart object as a chart object. Dim Excel table object as a list object, not a table object, not like I did in the last video. I keep doing that and it drives me crazy. Okay, and then we're going to start making our PowerPoint specific variables. So these objects are going to be for PowerPoint specifically. So I'm going to do a different naming convention. I'm going to do PPT app. This will represent a PowerPoint.application object. So in Excel, we get spoiled a little bit. Everything is set up for us. When it comes to working with other applications, we have to be much more explicit when we're writing code for them. So we can't necessarily assume we have a reference to the application object. We can't assume there's a presentation. We can't assume there's a slide. We're going to have to create all of these objects ourselves. So just a little bit of a more good to know information when you're starting to write some of this. We're going to do a slide object as well. This will represent a slide object. So you have application. Inside your application, you have presentation. Inside your presentation, you have slides. And then inside your slides, you have shapes. Good old shapes. So we're going to also have a PowerPoint.shape object as well. Please do not make an Excel shape. PowerPoint shape and Excel shapes, even though they might look similar, they're very different. Very, very different. So make sure you declare your object variables correctly and that you're referencing the right objects in the right application. It's easy to get those confused. Trust me, I've done it. Okay, and then we're going to have an object field. This is just going to be a string. We'll see it in usage when we start going through the loop. And then also, we're going to have an object field parts. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking that little drop-down value and we're going to be splitting it on the delimiter that we specifically created. Now, technically speaking, I have to be cautious when I do that because I want to make sure there are characters that I'm not using as a delimiter that somebody could use in the sheet name or the object name. So if you want it to be probably safe, you would probably do something like an @ symbol. It's not pretty, but it's probably the safer route to go simply because I've worked with people and they will use characters that I'm assuming can be used as delimiters. And before I know it, I can't run the code. So keep that in mind when you're defining your delimiters, that you're actually using something that's unique and that they can't potentially put in the name of the object unless you can control for it somehow. Okay, and then we're going to have our object name. This is also going to be a string as well. We're going to have our object sheet. This is going to be a string. And then we're going to have the object type, and that's going to be a string as well. And then I'm going to put this all the way up there so we have some space. First, grab the book. Super simple. We'll set that Excel book equal to this workbook. I already talked about this in the previous video. This might not be the best route. You might want to do active book, but just keep in mind they need to be in the right one. Then also grab that sheet, set the Excel sheet equal to Excel book. There's a worksheets collection inside our workbook, and we want the export sheet. Grab the table, set the Excel table equal to the Excel sheet. There's a list objects collection. I want the export to PowerPoint table. And then from here, the first thing we need to do is we're going to create a new instance of PowerPoint. Now, there's a couple ways we can do this. We can assume that it's never there and then create a new instance of the application every time. Or B, we can check to see if the PowerPoint application is there. If it is there, then we will use the active instance, and then we'll see that we can basically just create a new presentation from that active instance. So this portion is going to create a new instance of PowerPoint, but I'm going to be showing you how to check to see if the active one is there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write this little line called on error resume next. So if there's an error, keep going. Don't stop. This is dangerous because what happens is if I put this right here, what's going to happen is if there's an error, it's just going to keep going. So just keep in mind, this can be a good and a bad. You just have to know how it operates. And right now I'm basically saying like, okay, any error from this point forward, just skip it on over. So the first thing we're going to do is grab the active PowerPoint application if it's there. So set PPT app equal. There is a get object function. We don't care about the path, but I do care about the name. I'm going to use the program ID called PowerPoint application. Now, if the application isn't open, it will return a 429 error. Very specific, but if it's not there, we will have it. And so what we're going to say is if error.number equals 429, then and if, what do we want to do? Basically, it means it's not open. So then we need to create a new instance. So first, clear the error. So we're going to say error.clear and then create a new instance of PowerPoint. So we're going to set our PPT app equal to a new PowerPoint.application object. Now, just because we have an application doesn't mean we can see it. So make it visible. Very, very important. Make it visible. So we're going to set our visible property equal to true. Make sure you can see it. And then from here, you don't have to do this. You can if you want. If you want, bring the window to the front. So PPT app, there's an activate method that will bring it to the front. Activate works sometimes, other times it doesn't work. It just depends the day, time, probably other factors, but don't be surprised if that doesn't work. But at the same time, it's not super important if that's not necessarily the case. So don't beat yourself up if you can't get it to work consistently. Okay, so after that, we're going to create a presentation. So I'm going to take my application object. There's a presentations collection. And guess what? There's an add method you can call that will add a new presentation to our collection. Now, at this point, I think what I want to do, let's just validate that we can open PowerPoint and we can add a presentation before I start writing a bunch of other code. So first thing is I'm going to compile my VBA project just to make sure there's no blatant errors like misspellings, missing arguments, and stuff like that. And then from here, I'm going to run it. Looks good so far. So I would say at this point, my code is working to the point I want it to. How long have we been going? 13. Oh, I'm going to cut the video here just because the next one's going to be a little bit fun. So yeah, let's just cut the video here. So if you have any questions about, I guess, just kind of setting up the structure of your code maybe, or, you know, thinking through like, hey, how do I kind of go about this? You know, feel free to put those questions down in the comments below. I will try to answer them, or maybe somebody else will if they get to it first. But, you know, if you have any questions, you know, feel free to put them down in the comments below. This will obviously be hosted on GitHub like pretty much all the other code. So, you know, if you need to, just go to the link down in the description and you should be able to find the code there as well. And then I will also be posting this to my Facebook group as well. So I have a Facebook group for Sigma coding where I do post workbooks that have the code and then have the objects. So that way, you know, you guys can kind of take it and then play around with it and obviously adjust it to whatever you need. So again, any questions, put them down below. Otherwise, we'll see you in video number 3.